Morning. All right. Before we get to free will today, we do have to finish up our discussion on personal identity. So we talked briefly last time about transporter cases and split brains. We left off somewhere around here, but I actually want to go back a slide um, just to make sure that we're thoroughly recapped. Hello, sir. Um, we were beginning to talk about sort of soul views of the self, and we covered a little bit, just a tiny bit, of Plato's view, which I've heard some describe as a sort of view on which the soul is a spiritual substance, right? The soul or psyche um, is, according to Plato, what is essentially you. And it's this incorporeal, immaterial, immortal substance that leaves the body after death. And if you read, Phaedo, for example, you find that Socrates, or sort of Plato through Socrates, tells us that um, the soul survives death, is eventually re-embodied. But before that happens, the soul encounters the perfect forms. So we all have this sort of innate knowledge, at least when it comes to the perfect forms. In the Meno, Plato has Socrates tell us that, um, well, we have innate knowledge of everything, but he kind of walks it back a little bit in the Phaedo. It's really just innate knowledge of the forms. So, um, the good, the true, the beautiful, virtue, all kinds of things like that. We forget this because of the trauma of birth, but we can recollect it. We can do something called anamnesis, um, by doing philosophy, by practicing the Socratic method, having a teacher ask us the right questions, um, can sort of reawaken this knowledge, right? So that's Plato's view. And it's interesting, I think, how it is very closely tied with Plato's epistemology, right? It's not just a medical view of the soul, it's also an epistemological theory, which is kind of interesting. And elsewhere, Plato divides the soul into parts. So um, we have our appetitive soul, which is responsible for basic drives and desires, the spirited soul, the sort of seat of our emotions, our passions, our pains and pleasures, and the rational soul, which is for thinking. So that's a little bit about Plato. And we also talked about how Aristotle has a tripartite model of the soul as well. But his is a little bit different than Aristotle's. Um, or his is a little different than Plato's, rather. Aristotle believed that we have a nutritive soul, which is responsible for things like growth and reproduction, consuming food and water and that kind of thing. A sensitive soul, which allows us to sense the environment and move around in it. So our sensory systems, our locomotion and stuff like that. That's the sensitive soul. The rational soul is something only humans have. Aristotle would say somebody like this fellow has a nutritive soul and a sensitive soul, sure. And something like this only has a nutritive soul. But we are special. We have a rational soul. And in fact, this was, if you remember, the essential characteristic that human beings have that makes us the kind of substance that we are is reason. But of course, for Aristotle, the soul is not some incorporeal, immortal spark of the divine that leaves the body after death. The soul is an organizing principle. That's a little bit of an abstract idea to wrap your head around if you're not used to thinking about it. Um, but it's part of his hylomorphic account of, well, the soul and of other entities too. Hylomorphism is a view that, well, it comes from hule, which means matter, and morphe, which means form. So to be a thing, you need to be made of something, but that matter has to be organized in the right way. So without form, matter is just stuff. It's not organized. It's just inert matter. And without matter, form is, well, really nothing. It doesn't exist in some kind of ultimate reality like Plato's forms. Form needs matter and matter needs form. So that's hylomorphism. And we, and all other individuals, all the other beings, remember, are primary substances that are made of matter, and that matter is arranged according to some form. And the form that organizes the matter is what Aristotle understands as soul. So anything alive has a soul. For artifacts, they don't have souls, but they are caused in such a way that they are still sort of unions of form and matter. You remember, for example, the four causes. An artifact like this has to have a material cause. So what it's made of, porcelain. And it also needs a formal cause, which is, of course, the form it takes, that of a cup. But it doesn't have a soul as an organizing principle. Rather, it has an efficient cause and a final cause. Someone had to make this, right? Maybe they made it with a machine, maybe they did it by hand, probably a little bit of both, maybe a pottery wheel and some good old fashioned a good old fashioned pair of hands or something. So we'll call the pottery person or the mug maker is the efficient cause, the thing that brings this into being, the thing which takes the matter and gives it a form. And then, of course, it has a purpose, a final cause, or a telos, and that is for holding delicious coffee or tea or whatever you want, really, but ideally a warm beverage. So that's an example of an inanimate object. What about an animate object? Well, I still have a material cause. I'm made of matter, made of all kinds of things like, lots of carbon, lots and lots of water, um, iron in my blood, calcium in my bones, etc. And the formal cause is my soul. The efficient cause, Aristotle would say, is probably some kind of god, like a prime mover sort of god. And then I have a final cause, or a telos, which I suppose is to exercise my reason to be excellent, to do philosophy, to do all the things that Aristotle thought was great. Yeah, you can also look at it like in terms of parents. I mean, my immediate efficient cause would be my parents. Efficient cause would be my parents. There's an echo there. There's an echo there. There we go. Um, and the sort of efficient cause of everything would be this Aristotelian prime mover. Um, so when it comes to something like me or this fellow here, the soul informs matter. When it comes to um, something like this, the matter has the ability to be formed by some efficient cause. So this ability for matter to be informed for some end is called entelechy. And it's actually matter that individuates beings for Aristotle. Like for Plato, I have a soul, you have a soul, but we have different souls. It's not entirely clear what differentiates our souls from one another because they seem to be quite similar. For Aristotle, what individuates different beings is matter. I'm a different being from you because I'm made of different stuff. Imagine, I forget the particular example, but some physical object. Imagine that I'm the pottery maker and I've made lots of coffee mugs like this one. And I'm so good at it that they're nearly identical when they come out of the kiln. But what is it that individuates each of them? The matter. They're made of different stuff. They're made of the same kind of stuff. I don't know, clay or whatever it is they make coffee mugs out of. But this one is made of a different lump of clay than all the other ones. They're all made of different lumps of clay. So that is what individuates beings for Aristotle. As you get closer to modernity, when we look at philosophers from the Middle Ages, we see that some of them tried to adapt Aristotle's views to sort of inform um, sort of like Christian theological reasoning on the soul. So Thomas Aquinas, for example, um, wanted to know um, not only what happens to the soul after death, but what happens to you after death. What happens when it comes to your personal identity after death? I mean, he's a Catholic theologian, but he's also massively influenced by Aristotle. In fact, in Aquinas's writings, you often hear him refer to the philosopher, and he's talking about Aristotle. Aristotle, for all intents and purposes, is one of the only thinkers who matters for Thomas Aquinas. So that's why he calls him the philosopher, like he's the only one or something, right? Aristotle himself didn't really seem to be concerned with the soul surviving death. In fact, if you're an Aristotelian, the soul probably doesn't survive death. Because remember, form needs matter and matter needs form for an entity to be what it is. So if the body dies and that matter starts to break down, well, now the form has no matter. In fact, like um, when my body ceases to function, my metabolism stops, growth has stopped, um, all of these sort of vital processes have stopped. Um, it's almost like the soul isn't doing anything with the matter anymore. So there's probably no life after death. It's weird. Aristotle kind of almost gets a little bit, it seems to me, it's almost a little bit mystical. Um, you don't survive the death of your body, but mind does. It's very strange, very opaque, and almost mystical, I find it. I will not say any more about that though, because I don't think I'm expert enough in Aristotle to really do that justice. But Aquinas, very straightforwardly Catholic, believes that the soul survives death and eventually gets to heaven or perhaps hell. But he wants to know what happens to you as a person after death. So in Catholicism, what happens is this: you die, and eventually your body is going to be resurrected. Not every branch of Christianity agrees on this. But in Catholicism at the time, if you died, your body, is dead, they bury you. Um, Eventually, you are judged, and it's determined whether you go to heaven or hell, or some would go to purgatory, like babies who haven't been baptized or something. Um, and then when you get to heaven or hell, your body gets resurrected. So what happens? What happens to you in between the death and the resurrection? That's what Aquinas wanted to know. And Aquinas actually concluded, based on the teachings of Aristotle, that although your soul survives until the resurrection, your personal identity does not survive. He said, the soul, since it is part of man's body, is not an entire man, and my soul is not I. So that's really interesting. And you can kind of see the echoes of Aristotle's hylomorphism here. Sure, the soul survives, but the soul needs the body, and the body needs the soul in order for you to be you. So you kind of stop being you until you get to heaven and you are sort of re-embodied, and then you continue to be you again. If you think back to the transporter case we began with last time, this is kind of like that. And in fact, early transporter cases, did not involve sort of Star Trek inspired matter energy transporters at all. They were about this, whether you are you when you are resurrected in heaven. Like if God, decides, okay, you lived a good life, so you get to go to heaven. So here we go, bloop, resurrected body. Well, now we're kind of faced with a transporter case. Am I the same as the me that was living on Earth if my body has been taken apart and put back together again? Aquinas, for his part, says, well, I don't know, but when your body is dead and you are just a soul waiting for judgment, you are not completely you. You're just your soul. To be you, you have to be a soul and a body. But then again, not everyone takes this view. Richard Swinburne is closer to Plato on this. Your soul is what constitutes your personal identity. So just like Plato, right? Your soul is what is essentially you. And all of your mental states are actually states of the soul. And this is incidentally how the mind was regarded for a good while in philosophy, probably right up until maybe beginning in the late 18th century, definitely by the 19th century. We still had talk of the soul, but up until this point, the soul was always treated as equivalent to the mind. They were the same thing. The soul, the mind, same thing. Even if you read uh, somebody like William James, who's much closer to our time and our way of thinking about minds and souls than somebody like Plato or Thomas Aquinas. Even William James talks about the soul and the mind interchangeably. So the soul is what is essentially you, and it's what allows you to think, and it's what makes you alive. So our souls, our psychology, same thing. In fact, that's the root of the word psychology. Remember, the ancient Greek word for soul was psyche or psyche. We're actually not sure how it would have sounded, but we know how it was written. And take a look here. Psychology, psych from psyche, soul. And psychology is the study of the mind, or I guess really, if you ask a behaviorist, study of behavior. What did Swinburne say about this? He said, Souls are immaterial subjects of mental properties. They have sensations and thoughts, desires and beliefs, and perform intentional actions. Um, Intentional actions are those that we have reasons for performing. To continue, souls are the essential parts of human beings, and humans have sensations, etc., and perform intentional actions in virtue of their souls doing so. So, the soul is what enables me to think and to do. Not just that, but importantly, that is what Swinburne is saying here. But what makes my soul different from your soul? What makes me me and you? If our souls are just, I don't know, similar to the spiritual substances of Plato. Well, what differentiates my soul from yours is that my soul has a thisness, and your soul has a different thisness. It comes from a Latin word, which I'm probably going to mispronounce, but uh, haecity, or yeah, we'll just say that. I'm not gonna butcher that any further than I probably just did. But that's a Latin word which means thisness. Comes from John Duns Scotus, another medieval philosopher. Incidentally, John Duns Scotus or Scotus just means John who lives in Scotland. I guess you could be a bit less creative with your names. Back in the Middle Ages, there weren't as many people. Which John wrote that? Oh, the one from Scotland. Like there's only one. Um, so I have a thisness, you have a thisness. Our souls are unique and sort of particularized by their thisness. A sort of intrinsic characteristic that individuates each soul. And thisness is a basic metaphysical fact about souls. What does he say beyond that? Not much. And it's if you find this idea of thisness a little vague, yeah, I don't blame you. It is kind of vague. Like, well, okay, so I have my soul has a sort of almost like a particularness to it that makes it mine. Okay, but what does that mean? Beyond that, what is it like what is it about this thisness that makes my soul different from everyone else's? You know, it's not as straightforward as Aristotle's view, where what makes me different from you is that I am a different union of matter and form. So, I'm made of different stuff, and we all have reason. We all have that essential attribute that makes us human, but we also all have um, different stuff that we're made of. We're all made of different matter. Our accidental attributes, which are due to the matter we're made of, are what individuate us. But a thisness of a soul, I don't know that really, this is just me speaking personally. I don't know really whether that informs us very well of what makes souls different from other souls. Yeah, yeah, but what characteristics, right? I mean, you see what I'm saying? It's like imagine if I said that this cup had a different thisness. It's just this cup and not all the other cups. In the same way, you are April and I'm Josh, and we all have a different thisness. Okay, but what do you mean, Swinburne? Right? Huh, my phone is listening to me and giving me search results for that. It's no help though. It doesn't tell me about thisness. Yeah, particulars, I don't know. We are particulars ourselves. But if I have a particular soul and you have a particular soul, but those souls are made of the same kind of substance, what individuates them? It's weird that Swinburne draws on thisness when, in talking about uh, souls being responsible for our mental life, he doesn't appeal to something like Locke does, like memory. Um, yeah, so I find this idea of thisness, it's very like middle-aged metaphysical sort of view. It's very like how many angels on the head of a pin kind of a thing. So I try not to think about it too much because I'll be honest with all of you. It doesn't I don't grok it. You know what I mean? It's not it's not an idea that I easily assimilate. I am more I suppose in the Aristotelian camp on this one. It's funny because Plato, Swinburne, you read them and they're easy to read. Like, oh, okay, a thisness, sure, but what does that mean? I don't know. Aristotle is not easy to read. Aristotle is one of the most dense. His writing is dense, so dense, and just his writings are like a logic, like he's like a logic machine. He's not easy to read. You have to look at Aristotle line by line by line. But when you do that, it does kind of make sense, at least to me. It does speak to me, and I am able to understand what he's saying. It just takes more time and more reading. Yeah, that's right. Like for example, well, for Aristotle, like for example, we know that he had a university. It was called the Lyceum. And he wrote treatises for his students, like the Nicomachean Ethics, for example, was a book about how to be a good person. And some people think that the reason, like where it gets its title from, the Nicomachean Ethics, is because he might have written it for his son, to sort of like make sure that his son could be a good person. Now, Plato has these dialogues, and Plato also had a university called the Academy. But Plato's approach is right. It's not that either of them did or didn't write learning materials, but Plato is writing. Plato's writing dialogues, whereas Aristotle is writing treatises. Right? Very different approaches. Um, so if you find this notion of thisness a little weird, don't sweat it, I guess is what I'm saying. All right, so now we got to talk about free will. So we're on to the penultimate chapter, the second last chapter in Crumley. So let me refill the coffee, and we will talk about freedom of the will. Now, freedom of the will is one of my favorite topics, but it's also kind of an unnerving topic. I was just teaching about it in my first year seminar last week, and well, I think probably continuing into this week a little bit. Um, my first year seminar on consciousness, and it is it's fascinating to ponder whether we have it. And unfortunately, I think I end up leaving a lot of students worried that they may not, in fact, have free will, which is not my aim. I do think we have free will in a sense, And um, that's my view. That is also, though, I should note, my opinion. You may find yourself by the end of the unit on free will, sharing a view like mine, which is called compatibilism, or you may find yourself a determinist, a hard determinist. That's somebody who denies that we have freedom of the will. Or you may be a libertarian, not one of those weird political libertarians like those American libertarians who want to go and live in the woods and don't want the government to know what they're up to. Not like that. No. A libertarian, when it comes to the freedom of will, is somebody who believes that, well, we do have it. We're not determined by other factors like, we're not determined by um, prior events in our lives, to make such and such a decision in the future, right? Um, yeah, Justina says it's very complicated. It is. And Jonas says, um, yeah, yeah, your reaction, working on your essay, working on free will, you can sort of wind up wondering, wait a minute, do I have this? Or am I not free, right? Yeah. Um, yeah, Amy, good point. And this is what a lot of philosophers have said, even if we don't have it, there's not much we can do about it. But beyond that, we kind of have to pretend we have it, even if we don't. Otherwise, how can we hold anyone responsible for anything, right? Um, yeah, on a chemical level, yeah, this is Remy, that's a good point. Maybe on a lower level of analysis, there is no free will, but on a higher one, there is. Um, we won't get to this today, but in the second set of slides, we'll consider whether freedom of the will might be an emergent property. So the universe might be deterministic at the physical, like physical level or a chemical level, but maybe in really, really complicated systems like the human brain and body, emergent properties occur because of the organizing, the sort of the way that the lower levels are organized. You get new properties arising out of that complexity. Maybe freedom of the will is something like that. But we'll have to get to that next time. So, um, this is a metaphysical question for us, whether we have free will. Are we the kinds of beings that can make choices, right? So we're not asking whether we're free, like socially or politically, oh, I can't go to the movies. I have my essay I need to finish working on, right? Like free in a social sense. Or I finished my essay. So now my evening is wide open, gonna go see a movie, right? And we're not talking about it in the political sense either, like those libertarians, right? They want to be free, I guess, of government, right? Or of course, throughout history there have been um social systems that are implemented via some political apparatus where people have more or less freedom. So, throughout history, there have been people with more freedoms than others, right? There have been people who are free citizens. There have been people who are like, in ancient Rome, there were patricians and plebeians, right? In ancient Greece, you were a free citizen if you were an older owning male. Um, there were people with fewer rights. There were people with no rights. Like there were people who didn't own property, who could not vote in the Greek democracy, and it was quite similar in Rome. Then, of course, there were slaves, right? So we're not talking about freedom in that sense. We're talking about whether we are the kind of being that can choose how they want to act, how they want to think, what they want to do, what they want to believe, right? And for there to be freedom of the will, it doesn't mean that all of our actions need to be free, but at least some of them need to be free. So I can't just decide to flap my arms and fly to Carleton, right, for my next class today. Just not going to work, okay? That's not something I can choose to do. I cannot choose to just stop drinking water and expect to continue on living normally, right? I will get dehydrated and die if I don't drink water or indeed any liquid, right? So it's not like I'm free to do whatever I want. What we mean in philosophy when we ask whether we have freedom is what we mean by that freedom is whether we have the freedom to do otherwise or to have done otherwise. If I could have done otherwise, then I'm free, right? Maybe there's I don't know. Crumley always uses that Jamocha almond fudge throughout the book. I guess that's a Baskin Robbins thing. I guess Crumley really loves like ice cream or something because in every chapter, Jamocha almond fudge, delicious, right? Um, I like exactly one ice cream flavor, but let's say there's a cheesecake or something delicious in the fridge, and I'm up late at night, and I probably shouldn't indulge in that slice of cheesecake, but I do. Well, I could have not done that. I could have said to myself, "Now listen, Josh, you're supposed to be going to bed, not eating the cheesecake." Come on, you've been trying to watch those extra calories and cheesecake, although delicious, is calorically dense. So, come on, don't eat the cheesecake, eat the broccoli instead or something. I don't know, right? I could have eaten the broccoli, but I ate the cheesecake. And I did that for reasons, like, ooh, looked at that cheesecake, sugar, fat, yum, you got to eat that. That's my stone age brain going, you need to get as many calories as you can because you don't know when you'll eat next. But then my 21st century brain says, no, 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 that it'll be there in the morning. Or, well, probably shouldn't eat the cheesecake for breakfast, but it'll be there later, right? So don't eat the cheesecake. So I could have not eaten it. Yeah, maybe Crumley is sponsored by Baskin Robbins. Yeah. Yeah, April, we could just say we're nurturing our souls. Yeah, it is cheesecake. I can't decide not to. Well, Remy, good question. This is really more of like a psychology or a neurology question. So I don't know if I'm the right person to answer it, but take for example cases of psychosis, or probably the example that I'm more familiar talking about is schizophrenia, where you can undergo hallucinations, psychotic episodes and stuff. And some of those people report that they have a sort of sensation that maybe some of their actions are not their own, or even some of their thoughts are not their own. And that comes down to the way that the brain is working, ultimately, I think. We don't really have the chance to discuss this too much in this class, but there are some thinkers who think that the experience of an action being caused by you is an illusion, right? Like, this is Daniel Wegner's whole idea. He was a Harvard psychologist. He passed away a few years ago. But his whole shtick was that free will, or the experience of free will, is the mind's best trick. What you need is for a few things to happen. You need you need there to be a conscious intention to do something. The action has to follow it and be congruent with the intention, and it has to be close enough to the intention in time. And if those things happen, you experience the action as caused by you. But maybe in cases of psychosis, that gets messed up, right? In cases of neurodivergence, right? Like again, you've got to, well, what kind? How does your neurology vary, right? Some people with, for example, ADHD, um, they have problems with executive function owing to how their dopamine systems work. Um, so maybe that's the reason they have a hard time making a decision, for example. Um, with maybe somebody on the autism spectrum, I don't know. Probably the yeah, I don't know about decisions when it comes to those on the spectrum. Probably depends on interest and engagement. But yeah, I mean, if you have a psych professor or a neuroscience professor, this would be an interesting question to ask them. Don't just get my opinion, get theirs. April, what do you think?
So I actually have ADHD.
Mhm.
Um, so for myself, like I have the free will within my thought. I have the free will within, like I can make those, like I have those thought processes. And for myself, with my, like the way ADHD presents in me, it's impulse control that I don't always have free will over.
Mm.
It tends to just happen. So a common phrase that comes out of my mouth is my indoor thought came out to play, and I apologize.
Yeah, and well, that's a good point, right? It does present differently in different people.
Yeah.
And there are also different subtypes, right? There's like there's hyperactive, inattentive, and then I believe mixed.
Yeah, there's
Um,
three different types. It presents very, very, very differently within everybody. So some it's hard to detect, some it's very obvious, and some it looks like depression on steroids at times.
yeah, yeah. And Kaya has added in the chat that it depends also on the situation. Yeah, and Quinn says, things pop into my head. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think we all reckon with something like that, but certainly people who have ADHD have to deal with it differently. Um, am I going to eat that cheese? As far as I know, I don't have ADHD, although I was not happy with my psychoeducational assessment, as I was telling you a few weeks ago. So who the hell knows? Um, but set that aside, am I going to eat that cheesecake? Well, it depends. Am I starving or not? Right? If I've just eaten dinner, I'm not a dessert guy. So if I've just eaten a nice big dinner, I'm probably not going to eat the cheesecake, at least not yet. But if I've just come back from the gym and I'm really hungry, the blood sugar's low, I might just destroy that cheesecake. I don't know. Yeah, that's right. Addiction, well, one of the things addiction does is it messes with your pleasure control system and your executive function. So dopamine is really important for or pleasure reward, not pleasure control. Pleasure reward system. Dopamine is really important. It's a really important chemical in your brain where it underwrites your ability to set goals, to do tasks, to work through those tasks, and then to feel good when you're done the task. So dopamine is always often talked about as if it's just a feel good chemical, but But it's more than just that. It's really important when it comes to, like, when you're doing a task, working memory is very important. And dopamine is really important for regulating your working memory. Um, this is the reason why, for example, keeping with the theme of ADHD, this is why people with ADHD are often prescribed stimulant medication, right? Because dopamine has a stimulating effect, and stimulant medications work on those same receptor sites in the brain. Why would you stimulate somebody who has, potentially a hyperactive neurological difference? Well, because there's not enough dopamine in the system to maintain, I don't know, to make sure that your working memory is functioning optimally, right? So, now when it comes to addiction, often what happens is that the pleasure reward system gets hijacked by the chemicals that we're ingesting. But it doesn't have to be just drugs. I mean, people get addicted to video games, right? Because all the bright lights and sounds, and it's a dopamine factory, and you've got to get your fix. People get addicted to gambling for the same reason, right? Um, so there are drugs that work directly on the dopamine system. So of course, cocaine and methamphetamines and that whole family of stimulants works right on the dopamine system. Coffee does a little bit, but it's more in the sense that you just really like coffee and you get just some dopamine when you drink your coffee, which yeah, caffeine addict right here. I can quit when I want, but other drugs affect other systems. But dopamine is employed. Dopamine does stuff all the time when it comes to executive control, working memory. So it can be affected even if the substance you're taking is does not affect the dopamine system, or if it's not a substance at all. hmm Yeah. Well, if you have a strong impulse to do a thing and then you don't do it, maybe that's free will. Um, yeah, strength of will might be different from freedom of the will. And then there's a sense in which there's a British psychologist, Richard Gregory, who said something in relation to work that we'll talk about as we get further into this material. We might not have free will, he said, but we do have free won't. So you have an urge to do something. Okay, maybe you can't control that urge, but you can try and stop it. Now, Gregory's not talking about addiction in this context, but I think that that's something that a lot of addicts struggle with. And I've worked with addicts briefly, but I have had some experience dealing with them. And there's also the physical and mental symptoms of withdrawal that you have to think about, though, right? Like it's not like you're just craving a thing. Mind you, I'm talking about people who are in a pretty bad spot, right? I'm talking about fentanyl users, methamphetamine users who will, literally get sick if they don't use. At that point, it's not even if with those substances at that point, if you are addicted, you are pretty much taking those substances just to function, right? You're taking them not because they feel good. They don't feel like they used to feel at that point. You're taking them just to function. Um, I mean, hey, and I'm no better, right? If I don't have this in the morning, I am quite grumpy. And if I hold off on the coffee for an hour or two, I get by. But then when I finally get that coffee, it feels like I have superpowers or something. It's crazy, right? So, you know, Um, by the way, I'll say this: if anyone is experiencing a problem with some kind of substance or with some kind of behavior, because we don't just get addicted to coffee and fentanyl and alcohol and those things. But if you maybe video games or gambling, or some people say they're addicted to pornography, right? So if you're addicted to anything and you would like to stop or have some help, you can get in touch with health and counseling services, and they will help you. So I think it's good to say that. I think we need to destigmatize addiction, right? Because it is a mental health issue, and people deserve mental health care. April, go ahead.
So up until very recently, I was a caseworker at a women's recovery home.
Mm,
So, this is literally what I did. So I saw them coming in where they were dealing with the physical and mental symptoms of going through the first few weeks and then going from there. So I can resonate with what Remy was saying. I do want to acknowledge that at first it doesn't feel like a freedom of will, but then as you start to recover, you can regain some control through healing, and then it is that strength of freedom of will and that piece of building confidence within yourself to hold strong in your freedom of will to choose to stay sober each day.
yeah. And it's true. Like I've heard freedom of the will, and I've heard this analogy where, of course, your brain is not a muscle in the literal sense, but the more you practice something like that, it's like exercising a muscle, right? Um, and it's true, right? I think I know we're kind of getting off the rails here, but I think that from what I've seen, and my experience is probably not as extensive as yours, April, because I worked at this place for just a few months, and then I got this job. But it seems like when you're in the thick of it, like when you are really in the thrall of addiction, you feel helpless. But, I've also seen those people. This was prior to working at this place. It was the trailer down on, yeah, you know it. Yeah. So, and I had a student working there too. One of my former students was also a peer worker there, which I thought, oh wow, small world. But even before then, I used to work at that Tim's that used to be there. And I would see people, clients at Shepherd's in the trailer and coming in. And sometimes I wouldn't see them for a while, and then I'd see them again after they had gotten off of whatever they were on. And it was like, wow, like that's great. And you could tell. I remember one person in particular, she would come in every day, multiple times a day for a coffee and some donuts, get because when you use opioids, it does affect your blood sugar actually. So a lot of people after they access the services would come in for a snack. Um, and then I didn't see her for a while, and then I saw her again, and just the pride on her face from being clean for however long it was. You could tell that it's almost like she believed she could do it again, right? And so I would just say to connect back to where we were, maybe mental states are not causally inert. I mean, this matters, right? We're not just robots. Um, Yeah, and like Kaya says in the chat, right? It takes a while, forming a new habit, right? 6 weeks. Um, and it's true. And likewise, I imagine it probably takes a similar stretch of time to break a habit, right? So we seem to be free. We are rational. We have consciousness. We can decide to do things on the basis of reasons, right? And we can act on what we want, what we desire, what we believe. Maybe this person who I was speaking about a moment ago did not believe that they could kick the habit. But then, after a little while, with the right support, they came to believe that they could. And that's what's keeping them from using, right? Um, so we are agents. What is an agent? An agent is somebody who can make decisions and act on them. They can make decisions and act on those decisions on the basis of reasons. So if you can act on the basis of reasons, which could be, again, beliefs, desires, etc., you have agency. So we want to know, is that what we have? Are we free agents or are we determined? Certainly seems to us that we're agents, but maybe we're not as free as we think. I mean, when we look at the physical world, the natural world, we can see that everything is determined by natural law and prior conditions, right? What will happen in the future depends upon how nature works and how nature was in the past. And we're a part of the natural world. So we're not going to be an exception to the laws of nature, right? So that would imply that we don't have free will. But of course, there are various metaphysical positions on this. Like I said a moment ago, there are the libertarians who believe that we have freedom of the will. Oh, it's snowing. Oh, that's nice. Um, yeah, we have freedom of the will. Uh, Determinists, hard determinists, say we don't have freedom of the will. But don't confuse this with something like destiny or fatalism. It's not exactly the same thing, right? I'll get to the difference between these two in detail in the future, but determinism just implies that there's a sufficient physical cause for every event. Um, but fatalism or destiny, well, in philosophical terms, is like saying that events are metaphysically necessary. Um, and determinism isn't that strong. It's not that strong of a claim. And then there's compatibilists or soft determinists, and they are kind of in the middle. They say, sure, we live in a deterministic universe, but we're still free in the sense that we can always do otherwise, right? Why is this all important? It's it's important as we've sort of gestured at for knowing what kind of being we are. Are we the kind of being that is free, that can make decisions, that can act on the basis of reasons that we have? But it's also important for moral responsibility, right? I cannot be held responsible for anything, good or bad, if I'm not the agent that caused the thing that we're talking about, right? Let's say we're talking about something good, like, I don't know, giving to charity, or something bad, like theft. If I'm not the author of those actions, then I cannot be responsible for them, right? Like if I'm determined metaphysically to give money to charity, and you say, "Wow, Josh, that was really good of you. You're you're a good person and you did a good thing." Well, if I'm determined by, I don't know, the laws of nature, prior conditions, or my genetics, my upbringing, whatever, well, I didn't do anything. I'm not an agent. So you can't be like, "Hey, good job." Like, what? No, I'm just a cog in the machine that is the universe, right? Likewise with other actions like negative actions, right? For me to be responsible for my actions, they have to originate within me. I have to be the author of those actions, not just a domino in a whole series of dominoes. being knocked over by other dominoes, if you know what I'm saying. Please forgive the incredibly nerdy example, but it's a little bit more lighthearted than addiction and so forth. And plus, there might be some metalheads in the classroom. I don't know. But I like these concept albums from Canadian power metal band Unleash the Archers, Apex and Abyss. And they tell the story of a being called the Immortal. He's kind of like a genie of the lamp kind of creature. Um, Slumbers for eons, gets awakened, has to do the bidding of whoever awakens him. He doesn't have a choice. So one day, this dark sorceress called the Matriarch wakes him up and says, "Look, I need you to collect up my four sons." There's all kinds of different ones. There's like a politician, a general, a religious leader, and just a regular old family man. And the immortal has to go around, and the album sort of tells the story of him going around and collecting all of them. Why? Well, the matriarch must sacrifice them in order to achieve immortality. And then she says, "I will free you, Mr. Immortal." So he does her bidding because he doesn't have a choice. Um, but of course, the matriarch breaks her word, does not free the immortal. And now she has become immortal in turn. And the immortal goes back to sleep. The second album, it's kind of a revenge story. The son of one of the matriarch's sons um, wakes up the immortal, and they go on a vengeance quest through outer space. And eventually the immortal defeats um, the matriarch, earning his freedom. But the question is, in gathering up all these folks so that they can be ritualistically sacrificed, can we hold the immortal responsible for that? Not really, right? Yeah, it's like Aladdin. Yeah. And of course, in Aladdin, in the original telling, there's actually two genies. There's a genie of the cave and there's a genie of the lamp. In the Disney film, the genie of the cave is replaced by the magic carpet, right? So you can ask the same thing, right? Like when Jafar is getting the genie to give him all his wit, and you're like, "No, genie, don't help the villain." Well, the genie has to do it. He doesn't have agency, right? Likewise with the immortal. Like, why are you getting these people? You know, the general, the religious leader, the politician are not innocent in this story on this album, right? If you like concept albums, if you like fantasy, if you like Dungeons and Dragons, Lord of the Rings kind of stuff, then I highly recommend listening to this album. But these three are not innocent. You kind of like, okay, who cares? Sure, sacrifice them in this weird ritual and whatever. We don't care. But the fourth and final one is just a guy living his life, just a guy with his family, and he says, if I go with you, will you leave my family? Yes. Okay. And he goes with the immortal, right? And then you start to think like, oh geez, that's where it really starts hitting, right? So, why is the immortal doing this? Well, he doesn't have agency. He can't be held responsible for what he's doing. The genie, likewise, when turning Jafar into a sorcerer or something, right? Like, no, don't do it, genie, but he has to do it. He can't not do it, right? He doesn't have a choice. So, even though we might be rooting against the genie taking these actions, we can't really hold him responsible for it. At least not until the end of the movie when Aladdin frees him, right? Then every choice he makes is free. So, you are free. You have freedom of the will if and only if you could have done otherwise under the same set of circumstances, right? Like the cheesecake example. So we won't come up with any more examples. We've seen plenty of examples. What about styles of arguing for free will? One is the responsibility argument. Um, and I sort of gestured at this earlier. We need there to be free will because otherwise, how can we hold people responsible for their actions, right? So if you have to choose between A or B and you choose A, but you could have just as easily chosen B, I can hold you responsible for that choice. This is a different sort of thing than, what happens when you go to the doctor and the doctor tests your reflexes, right? So the doctor hits your knee with that hammer. It's called a patellar hammer because she strikes your patellar tendon, and your knee goes like boom, like that, right? You're not an agent in that case. The doctor is. The doctor is the one causing your leg to move, not you. But in deciding, between A or B, uh, do I eat the cheesecake or the broccoli? I can hold you responsible. So maybe my partner comes downstairs and, where's my cheesecake? Well, I ate it. Well, she can absolutely hold me responsible for eating the cheesecake instead of the broccoli, right? Uh, yeah, that's true. But there are other examples, right? Um, I mean, if somebody places something close to your eye, you can probably will your eye open. But it's hard, because when you get close, or maybe you could kind of, I mean, you shouldn't touch your eye, but you could probably give your eye a poke. But if someone else put their finger close to your eye, you would reflexively close them, right, to protect your eye. So maybe you can really struggle against these tendencies, but it takes work, right? So this argument might be schematized like this. Um, the first premise would say if we are responsible for our actions, then we have free will. The second premise would state that we believe, at least, we are responsible for our actions. And the conclusion is that we have free will. Yeah. And yeah, Remy, like you say, strength of will. And like April was saying, um, um, it's something it's almost like a skill. It's almost like exercising your choice is a skill. Or like I said, right, like people make the analogy with a muscle. You exercise the muscle, it gets stronger. Yeah, Quinn, yeah, that's right. I mean, there's some things that you just can't will yourself not to do. The other day, I remember I was up late and I was petting the cat, and I thought, I'm gonna stay awake a little bit and give this guy some scritches. Um, and then the next thing I knew, it was the morning, and I was just like I was, like reaching out where the cat was, but the cat had left a long time ago. Because when it comes to needing sleep, you don't really have a choice, right? You can try and stay up, but eventually you will fall asleep. This is why people fall asleep behind the wheel, right? In dangerous situations, because you don't have a choice. Now, there's also the experience argument for free will. Now, the experience argument says that we experience ourselves as the author of our actions. It feels like when I reach out, for example, to pick up this coffee cup, it feels like I made that happen, right? So this argument might go like this. We might say, firstly, that your experience is a more or less reliable guide, and experience suggests that I am the cause of my actions. You know, I'm not being coerced. I'm not intoxicated. I'm not sick. I'm not hallucinating. All things being equal, my experience is a reliable guide, and my experience tells me I am the one making the choices, right? But there are people who would disagree. I mentioned Daniel Wegner, who says that free will is an illusion, or more accurately, the experience of freedom of the will or intentional volition is an illusion. So, how does it work? Well, I form the intention to pick up the coffee cup and have a sip. I do the action. The action is congruent with my intention and occurs close enough after I have the intention, so it feels like I made that happen. And Wegner's done some really interesting experiments, where he kind of manipulates the time between intention and action, and when um, the intention is weak, and doesn't occur close enough to an action, people don't feel like they caused the action, right? So I think we have time to finish this slide and maybe start the next one before we have to call it quits. But let's talk about determinism. So determinism says that every event is the necessary outcome of some uh, set of prior circumstances and physical laws. Now, what are events? Events are changes in the world, or happenings, if you like, right? So an event might be, your graduation. Maybe you graduated high school recently. Um, Probably you did. Most of you did, although some of you might have graduated a little longer, in farther back in the past, like myself. Um, Having a party, that's an event. But events can also include lots of smaller events, like World War II is an event, but it's composed of lots and lots and lots of other events, right? Even smaller events, your high school graduation or your birthday party, is an event made of smaller events. Yeah. Yeah, high school was a while ago. I'm starting to get the gray hairs and I'm not even 40, but I don't care. I don't even care. Um, Yeah, YouTube is showing me those just for men, get rid of your gray with just for men. Like, I'm not gonna do that. I don't have time for that. Yeah. Yeah, 2022. When did I graduate? It was 2020, 2020, no, 2002. Blah. See my brain. Um, I graduated high school. Yes, I did. No, it was 2004 for me, I think. Yep. So deciding to do something is also an event. So if I decide, okay, I'm going to pick up my coffee cup and have a sip, the picking up of the cup is an event, the sip is an event, but the decision is also an event. That's true. Well, yeah, like Jonah says, makes me look wiser. Well, but then like Kaya says, is that because I'm a man and there are these like gender stereotypes, right? So we allow, it's like men can get old and that's fine, but women get old and people think, and I don't believe this, okay, but yeah, women get old and it's like, oh no, now they're old and whatever. What do they do now? But men get old and it's like, oh, what a distinguished person, those are sort of like stereotypical gender things, which are not good, that we should try and get rid of. um Unintended consequences. That's a really interesting point. Yeah. So people, people hold other people responsible to different degrees for foreseen and unforeseen consequences. So, um, if I foresee a consequence of an action and I do the action anyway, and then that consequence happens as a result of my action, people will get really mad about it. But if it's an unintended consequence, people will be a little bit less mad about it. So that's an interesting finding from like the moral psychology literature. Yeah, yeah, like first or second degree murder. So, so deciding is an event. The deciding is volition. It's how it's what we call volition. So if you decide I'm just not going to go to class today, that's a result of your volition. But if you slept through your alarm, that's not. Um, Maybe I can hold you responsible for sleeping through your alarm and missing class. I could say, well, you should have set two alarms, right? Um, but I'm probably going to be more upset if you just decided not to go to class, which happens. I remember the other day in one of my other classes, I was going to the physical location and I saw one of my students in that class walking, the opposite direction, and I said, "Hello." And then they weren't in the class that started 10 minutes later. And I found myself going, "Ooh, you students," right? But if they had just like slept in or couldn't make it because like they had a flat tire or something, then yeah, whatever, don't sweat it, right? Yeah. Yeah, that's true. In murder cases, you mean? Yeah. Well, there's an interesting case of a man who suffered from somnambulism, that is sleepwalking. And I think he like murdered his in-laws or something. But he was found not criminally responsible because he was sleepwalking the whole time. Like, yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, not just in murder cases, but yeah, your intentions matter. Your deciding to do something matters when it comes to responsibility. Anyway, mental changes like decisions, volitions are events. Events are happenings or changes in the physical world, and what happens in the physical world is the necessary outcome of prior conditions and physical laws. So if my mental states are ultimately physical, then they are the necessary outcome of these antecedent conditions and physical laws. So my volition, my deciding to do things are determined. That's hard determinism in a nutshell. I don't have free will because I'm part of the physical universe, and sure, I can make decisions, but those decisions always arise out of prior conditions and natural laws. So again, I am just a cog in the machine. I am a domino in a line of dominoes. I am a stone rolling down the hill. Yeah. Oh, I believe you, uh, April, when it comes to sleep. Yeah, see, that's what I said. This can be a little depressing, right? You think start of the class. Yeah, of course I have free will. And we're only on slide number 6. We haven't even made it through all of today's slides, and now already we're thinking, "Oh boy, I might not have free will." Sucks. But don't worry, I think we do. So we'll try to finish this next time. We'll try to finish We'll try to start the other set of slides. It looks like I might have to try and really condense the final chapter, which is about God, um, for the final week, because we are coming up on the end of class. Yeah. Well, and some people argue that, Kaya, like next time when we talk about fatalism, I mean some philosophers say like, hey, just be a fatalist, right? Don't worry about it. Like don't sweat it. Um and there are different ways to do so, I suppose. Often I think this is done in a sort of either a religious or spiritual context. But even if you're more secular, like myself, and you think, well, yeah, there's nothing I can do. Whatever happens is going to happen. Then don't sweat it. Don't worry about what you cannot affect. But I think people want to hang on to this idea that they can affect something because it feels like we can, right? Because it feels like we have free will. And also, we want to hold people responsible for what they do, right? But let's pick it up again next time. Yeah, like Remy said, yeah, there's utility in believing that we have free will, even if we don't. Um, so we'll pick this up next time. Thanks, everybody. This was a really fun discussion today. I hope you aren't too depressed by the prospect of not having freedom of the will. But I'll try to convince you that yeah, actually we do, even though we live in a deterministic universe. We'll do that next time. So I'll see you all on Thursday. Bye for now, everyone. Yeah, thank you. Have a nice day.